I'm Doug Clinton, managing partner and co-founder at Deepwater Asset Management. And this is the Deload podcast, where I interview builders and founders of frontier technology companies that are shaping where the world is going. Today, I speak with Aaron Ginn. Aaron is the CEO and co-founder of Hydra Host, which is a Deepwater portfolio company. Hydra provides software to data center operators to help them manage their inventory and get compute to customers that need it. Today, Aaron and I talk about the wild demand that's happening right now in the GPU markets because of AI, how many developers may be able to use less powerful GPUs than they might think, and ultimately how Hydra is helping solve the AI compute dilemma. And now, here is Aaron Ginn. All right, Aaron, thanks for joining us. You're going to be a really fun person to talk to because you are in sort of the eye of the storm of this crazy race to find accelerated compute and find access to GPUs. So let's start at the beginning, at the basics. You run a company called Hydra. Tell us what Hydra does.
Thanks for having me, Doug. So we started Hydra a couple years ago with the premise of like how do we actually create a more universalized agnostic framework that allow people to move workloads between different types of nodes, and those nodes would be like hosting providers like Amazon, Google to DigitalOcean. And so what we landed on was the fact of like at the cloud layer that there were a lot of limitations within the virtualized world that in hosting that created all of these like lock-in effects, and that actually in light of the things that were happening in the market and also what was happening on the data center bare metal side, that value prop of like agnosticism and being able to be node independent was mostly going to be impacting high performance compute. And that those types of people will actually not gravitate towards cloud, but actually gravitating towards data centers and also spending money on metal and creating their own sort of co-location network. So we shifted the framework and the customer type last year, and we've been basically building out, you more or less could say like an Airbnb for colo or colo on demand. And so we've been working directly with OEMs and also data centers to build out various types of high performance computing frameworks for customers, and we've been pretty successful there in getting a lot of traction. And so what we provide actually is a software layer to actually enable companies to access data centers much easier and faster. So similar to what you would go see in Amazon and having the whole GUI nice framework, we actually do that for data centers. But we're actually completely agnostic. So where it's a data center in Virginia, or data center in Sweden or Iceland or London, using the same API, the same Terraform provider, the same ways you pay the bill, like all the universal framework and all security and networking is done in the same place. So if you've ever actually have built a colo or worked in a data center, that's pretty amazing because we have simplified provisioning down to as easy as it is to get access to AWS. But you get all the advantages of bare metal and all of the flexibility, the security, and any sort of the additional sides what you need on the networking and clustering. You get all that access, but have the same simplicity and ease of use as you would see on public cloud.
Yeah, you've hit kind of the perfect place, right time kind of thing. And I know in one of your recent investor updates, you talked a little bit about how some of these providers, data center providers, have tried to create their own software layer to maybe do what you guys do. Why do you think they haven't been successful or able to do that?
Yeah, well, because it's sort of like, let's use a different metaphor, but like Tesla versus like the other car companies, right? Is that Tesla is like, is it actually in the business of like hardware or is it in the business of software, right? It's in the business of UX. It's in the business of software. Like it's same with Apple, right? Like the Apple is in the business of UX. It's not in the business of like making devices, right? It's how the device interconnects, right? Which is why, Android is like way beyond like an individual Apple device now, right? And in terms of like individual specs, individual hardware features, and so that's where we're focusing on is actually building this sort of UX component because data centers are like car manufacturers, right? They're into real estate, they're into metal, they're into like racks, yeah. So the whole sort of package of like how you actually access those things. A lot of companies, platform companies, have outsourced that to cloud. But in terms of this next phase of computing, particularly the limitations within public cloud and like how they've actually designed their networking, they're not really set up to like take advantage of this next wave. Assuming other different things happen with Nvidia and Intel and other things that are going down the pipe, if that continues to go to this trend trajectory, you're going to see actually a modularization of like particularly AI. The AI is going to be this forcing function to where like it's going to force themselves into a hybrid environment. So cloud's been basically pretty stale in terms of like actually growth trajectory. Comparatively, it's just a huge cash flow generator, and the metering that you actually get from public cloud is actually really high. Like we're not talking about like Amazon isn't making 1% or 2% like Stripe on the transactions, right? It's making 30-40% margins, right? And so you see this movement away mainly because the needs of high performance computing is actually really accelerating this because you just can't do what you want to do within clustering, within inferencing, and training that you can get in public cloud. Like because what you need is the network density, and you need to have customizations in that. Like public cloud is not designed for that, and they've also been using different types of unique chips within their hardware that actually make it much more difficult to do rather than doing a fresh install at like a new data center, with a Nvidia rack, like literally, legitimately like Nvidia rack, like in terms of you want like the most advanced H100, it's a fully built system that you get and you put in there, right? And all of the public cloud providers have been optimizing for a CPU world, and this GPU phenomenon, which will continue, and especially if GPU finds other uses outside of AI, which it looks very likely, like video rendering and things like that, that's much more performant and efficient. There's all these other sort of necessary components to make those like run really well that like a lot of the public cloud providers are not optimized for in terms of how they like data centers, in terms of like how they actually interact with them. So we're seeing this fragmentation mostly because GPUs are so crazy expensive, right? And the commoditization of CPUs and the uniformity of CPUs and like what Amazon's been driving, which has been driving the price down, like has like fragmented the market, right? Where like GPUs are rising in terms of price, continually rising pricing, and they're improving in power, but also continue rising pricing versus CPUs been going down. Well, Amazon's been designing itself to be a Walmart. Right, it's been designing itself to be a massive sort of manufacturer, and the GPU needs are very bespoke and very like specific, and could range from like where you're paying $2 per GPU to $4 per GPU if you make different decisions in networking or also where you put it in hosting. And so that's why we've built a worldwide network of data centers, and also directly with OEMs. We have a partnership with like Nvidia to actually map this better, because if you get like, for example, we have one of our future partners is based in Sweden. Sweden's price per kilowatt hour is almost like 100% better than Germany, right?
Yeah.
And if you actually put it in a specific region, right, you're also looking at more increased costs in terms of like if you're closer to Stockholm or closer to the northern side of Sweden. And there are data centers being built out there using everything from geothermal to solar to actually providing heat into towns. And all that stuff in terms of when you're running maybe a CPU, like not really matter that much, right? But you're talking about like H100s and like, like the heat there and the level of needed to actually run that. And actually has been a linear growth too. So as more and more GPUs that come out, the energy requirements has actually linearly increased. So the performance has gone like exponential, right? But the power needs and the heat needs have actually been linear, and no one's been able to break the curve yet. So it's always going to increase. And so these bespoke sort of data centers around the world are being built that are highly optimized towards GPUs. And those mega centers in Virginia, they're really bad for this. Like they're not optimized to actually run these high intensity, and it requires a lot of modifications to actually do it. So this is why like these little kind of GPUs, in terms of why you're seeing the disparity in pricing so much within the market. And of course, there's price gouging as well. But like the disparity so much in the market, and why Lambda is so cheap, these other places so expensive, is like how you're actually designing data center really impacts the performance per GPU. And so our software enables a bunch of different data centers to basically provide their unique features as a real estate company that is only unique to them. That maybe in the CPU would matter for like 1 cent per hour, but for a GPU it could be like 30 cents, right?
Yeah.
Could be completely different.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you hear about things like A100s, H100s being sold out for like 12, 18, 24 months. How are some of the bespoke data centers that you're mentioning, are they finding some access to GPUs still? They have some on order that they're getting online, or what does that look like versus the big scalers?
Yeah. So essentially, there was a something in All In where Chamath showed like the arc and the curve of value creation for the mobile device. So I would say that like Nvidia is like very aware of that, and they saw basically how chip companies got screwed, right? And so their strategy has actually been really different. So they're trying to do footprint. So they're basically spreading themselves out as far as possible to as many data centers as possible, and they are avoiding big cloud. So you're not going to see a lot of movement in the big cloud companies towards using NVIDIA machines. They're going to invest in their own GPU. Like that's going to be my guess. And I think NVIDIA is very well aware of that. Is that like they of course they have the best on the market, but Intel already has some cool stuff out that's pretty good, right? But NVIDIA is the brand, so they're going to hold that for a number of years. But you already see competition within the chip space like starting to intensify. So NVIDIA knows that, and so they're shifting more towards like software packages, like full-on racks. They're trying to do footprints. So that's one reason why you're seeing more demand, or sorry, more supply within these like various data centers, is that they're trying to spread themselves out as far as possible, among as many companies as possible, and trying to get their footprint in, so that the people are continually investing in Nvidia as like a company, continue to update the Area 100s or H100s and service them, versus like trying to go all in on like one cloud provider, because they know that one, the cloud provider has much more cash than they do, and they could also just invest in making their own chip. Because you know what they've done? They've done that, right? They've already done that to see Amazon, Google, Microsoft, like
Yeah.
less so Microsoft, but the other ones, like they've actually done that, and they're investing in that, and they basically cut out different types of expenses in their value chain process. And so Nvidia doesn't want that, and so they're trying to spread themselves out, do deals directly with companies, try to like become much more, because they're horizontal across the world. That gives them greater flexibility in terms of customer and direct relationship with customers. They do not want to actually have. They're trying their hardest to like not have a middleman between them and their end customer, whatever the company is. And in fact, Nvidia is kind of blind to that. Like, and this is what happened in terms of their big mistake on the sort of A100 order that they during the lockdowns, that they had to like wipe off their books. Is that like they what was happening was that they basically like allocate per market, right? Like certain number of GPU cards. And what happened was that the American market was sold out. And so companies were basically trying to get the GPU, were like going to different regions like Africa, Southeast Asia, Europe, placing the same order to see what one got first. And when they got it in, they would cancel the other ones, right? So that's how they got to the situation that they're in. And so now Nvidia is not giving any promises on order times. So like as in the sense of like you have to place it and they'll tell you, right? And they're trying to develop more direct relationships with actual companies, so that they don't get sort of in that same situation they had before. But they're also like they're the kings right now, so they can kind of do that, right? Like we've heard of like let's say an H100 80 gig going for let's say 300K per, right? That whenever they get that like NVIDIA now is like charging whenever it receives, that they would actually increase the price, right?
Right.
So they're the kings now, right?
Yeah.
So props to them. They're trying to make as much money as possible because they know they're going to need a war chest to sort of defend their moat. But so far like NVIDIA still is the best on the market. There are other, if you go down the food chain to like A4Ds or A10s, you can find some more like one-on-one level competitors. But in terms of like the highest performing, NVIDIA by far is still the best. You're going to pay for it and you're going to wait for it. But yeah, like there are other. I also think there's like this kind of movement, which is kind of a little bit silly, that like a bunch of companies are saying that they want A or H100s, and when they could do just fine with like an A10.
Yeah,
Or
it's
they
a
say they
status
want.
symbol.
Yeah, or they say they want like IB, and you don't really need IB because you're not doing any form of like AI, like really anything. You're just using the cards. And so that's also caused a lot of problems for NVIDIA, is that like they so push the stuff on the high end
Right.
side that their lower end stuff, which would be just as good for a lot of places, like no one uses, right?
You forget about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It seems almost like when you talk about NVIDIA using this spreading out strategy, it's almost the perfect strategy for Hydra to take advantage of, because if you're
Yeah.
a developer and you need access to more capacity than a single data center can provide, then you need to come to somebody like you.
Yeah. So like that's why we take this like sort of Airbnb approach of like let's simplify the software, simplify the API, the security, because that's actually what you are getting when you use a big cloud provider. And let's just remove the middleman. Like let's do wholesaling, right? So essentially, we just provide the software for nearly free to a data center, and you can get what Amazon gets, right? You can basically get the rates that they do, right? And because these data centers, they're not, or these OEMs, like these people manufacturing uh, uh, these Nvidia boxes, right? Like they all have colos, they all have hosting. We have a partner in London, we have a partner in Luxembourg, we have a partner in France. Right, they all make machines for for the big Lambdas and the big Amazons, and they have a colo business, right? So every one of those steps, right, that you see in the building of a box to run the internet, you're adding 10 to 15% margin, right? So that's why like the way we're going to be advertising ourselves in the future is like buy the way the best do, which is at wholesale, right? And we're not going to do any cloud features, so you got to use the bare metal as you see fit. And we'll install an OS and an image on it, like whatever Ubuntu thing you want. But like all the other cloud stuff that if you don't need that, and if you're running AI, you don't really want that, like it just slows down what you're trying to do and makes it more expensive, then just do what the big boys do, right? Which is buy from a data center directly, set up the machine, put whatever you want on it, and run it, right? And you'll definitely be saving money at the end of the day.
Can you give us a sense for like how acute is the demand right now for these chips? Like I know you mentioned not everybody needs necessarily the highest performance GPUs, but if you're willing to pay for it, can you get access, or are people getting shut out of the market right now that want it or need that level of compute?
Yeah, it is. What's the right word for it? Like it depends. So like, if you use we know Lambda guys really well. They're probably like a year out, and like getting like really maybe to the point where they have excess. And the problem with one is bursting. That's one reason why there's like kind of this over sold nature is that you can't do what you need to do to like actually build out your value prop. But the second is like I actually think that the distributed nature of AI and machine learning and sort of the value prop it creates for companies is going to continue going forward. I don't actually believe that AI is a product. I think it's a feature of something else. And so in that world, you actually don't generally pay another provider to like run your AI. Rather, you run your AI in your own colo, in your own facility, right? Because it's something you add to the key part of your product that can continually generate value over the time. So you generally will not actually like send that to somebody else, right? To actually run it as a separate product. So I think that actually that's where and the proof of this, right, is that like why would somebody like a big company that has built this like awesome, let's say, chat AI for being a bank teller, why would you want to share that information if you're Charles Schwab and you vent it to Bank of America, right? You would not, right? You would want to own that IP, own those interaction points, and continue to refine that over the course of time. And that's actually the only way that AI actually makes sense, right? Is like it's this constant refinement process, and the likelihood that it exists as a standalone product, I think, is like very unlikely. But it's very, very likely that it was going to be incorporated into lots of things across lots of different products. And so in that environment, distributed GPUs across multiple data centers makes a lot of sense because everybody's going to be setting up their own clusters to do their own things that they can share across a large company, that they can continue to apply the feature of AI across different parts of their business to finding the thing that makes sense the most. I think AI is a standalone product and platform. I think it's like going to be if it does succeed, it's going to be like one or two things, right? Versus like how many businesses actually specialize in CRMs, right? It's like a ton of them, right?
Right.
Because it's an individual product someone will buy. But from an AI perspective, I just don't really see that. I see it becoming much more open source, much more like build your own methodology, and it becomes much more of a service orientation industry. So yay to Bain, McKinsey, and Boston Consulting, right? So they're going to be like I think really big winners here because people are going to need tinkering and like
Yeah, strategy.
constantly working through like how to make the ROI better. I do not believe it's going to be something that like, hey, here's the widget, put the widget here and it works, right? It's going to be much more of like over the course of time, and you want to own that data, you want to own that training because that's actually the value of the product, or you could say the feature. And outsourcing that to the company, I think is like going to be not very likely. So that's one reason why we built what we built is that like as companies continue to build out their own instances and try to figure out how they're actually going to incorporate LLMs, they're going to want more and more compute, right? And they want to be able to pass it off to somebody else, because that is something very different. So like that, if let's say Bank of America, I'm sure they have GPUs, but like Bank of America, like they have colos, they have their own infrastructure, right? GPUs is a completely different animal when it comes to a lot of these things, and so I think that's going to be more of like they're going to look for specialties to like say, hey, I need an A40 to do this, or an RTX to do this, or an H100, mainly because the price disparity is so huge, right? And until we see a more commonality, and you see sort of like, I think the chip makers start falling off in terms of like being able to charge these massive margins, I think you're going to see a wide eclectic need of like, okay, we're going to use H100s only for this, we're going to do this for this, and this for this, like you saw very early on in early web days. You're going to see a wide eclectic nature needed to actually do what they want to do from a cost saving and performance perspective. And then as 5 or 10 years, you're going to see much more of an equilibrium, I think, on a commonality across all of the chip makers, to where they can where that's not going to be as needed, right?
Yeah, I mean, optimization is the future of
Yeah.
of where people will invest resources. It seems
Yeah.
like also, as you've described that, AI being not necessarily a product or feature, that almost is a catalyst in your mind to push us to this post-cloud era where everybody is going to cloud, and now it's colo, owning your own bare metal. Is that right? Like, you think that is the right catalyst?
Yeah, I think it's a catalyst because of that. A lot of companies always wanted to do that. If you talk to that's one of the things about cloud that anyone tells you about the nature of like the cloud business, is that it's always the state of being constantly unhappy, right? If you talk to Shell or Walmart or whatever, right? Like it's always this kind of like back and forth game, right? Back and forth, right? Where the ease of use is nice, but then it becomes a limitation to an enterprise software product that they have installed in some colo, and then there's like some security concern, and there's cost, and it kind of goes back, right? There's actually a data center, I think it's the one that Tesla bought, the data center in Houston. Or maybe it was ChatGPT. I forgot who bought it. It was either Tesla or ChatGPT. Like that data center has like flip flop back and forth between like Shell, like 3 or 4 times. When Shell was like, "We're gonna do cloud," no, back to colo. Back to cloud, back to colo, right? So, and and there's all these there's these middle layer people called value-based resellers, right? And so they help set up all these big cloud deals for gas companies or whatever, and they will tell you all the time that that their business is basically never ending because these companies are always unsatisfied with cloud. So what I believe is just like cloud's good for certain things and colo is good for other things, right? So what we're just posturing is that for those workloads that you think that are more optimized for you running your own bare metal, you can just have a cloud-like API and billing system and security system, like a user permission model that is very similar to Amazon, and you just use that, right? And so it makes it easier for them to create these hybrid environments, because you legitimately cannot beat the security. I mean, that's by far the biggest advantage of bare metal is the security component compared to cloud. But this high performance side is showing much more of the weakness of like virtualized cloud, that like people would just rather invest in the hardware and like resell it. And I think that's going to be the case for the next couple of years. Until the shortage gets addressed, and there's some less I do believe in AI infrastructure. I think that's the next phase of investment that's going to happen in the space. I'm less bullish on individual AI products themselves, but I do think as a holistic approach across all of tech, that AI LLMs are a permanent feature of what's going to be required in a product. And so for that sense, AI infrastructure I think is going to be the next huge wave of investment that will actually make a lot of sense, right? And there's some tweet that came out that every investment in AI company is an investment in Nvidia. And that's technically true, because that's what you need to actually do it. So those companies have to do both. I'm not as bullish on, but that company that provides infrastructure in a flexible way that allows companies to to build a feature into their product with it. I think that's the next sort of 2 years of value, the next cycle of value creation.
I think I just saw, I think it was either United or American just announced that they were going to move away from cloud and do a hybrid structure. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, and you mentioned Shell as well, going back and forth. Yeah. Are those Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies, do you think they would be potential customers for Hydra, or are they always going to want to have maybe more say, run their own solution to do colo?
Yeah. Yeah, so this is why we call ourselves colo on demand, is like because we're this blend of bare metal as a service and colo on demand. So we focus much more on the aspects that like make the advantageous around colo than bare metal as a service. Bare metal service tends to be more cloudy, and it's basically run by the entity itself. Like Equinix is the best example of bare metal service. So like I mean you can get bare metal service from Amazon too. So but what we focus on is more colo on, we call it as colo on demand, because we're focusing on like clusters, we're focusing on like more of the networking problems and security problems about building a mesh between different data centers, which is much more of like a colo question. So yeah, like I think those larger companies would be a customer for us. We're focusing on high performance compute right now because the margins are better. But on our platform too, it's commodity CPUs if you want to buy it, right? But the idea that what we're trying to present is that all of this sort of like headache and pain of like of you trying to manage a colo, that like if you either like need a new region and you don't want to sort of cost optimize right now, you just need something set up in like a day, less than a day, then like we're the best solution for you. That we can get it going, and then you have all the security, all the networking done, and you just like turn it on, and it's just like cloud, right? So for people who want those types of security and resiliency models, like they have that requirement built into. We are good. We are an excellent use case. You're still like, of course, if you verticalize, like, yeah, I mean, you're always going to save money, right? If you're actually like buying and negotiating with Digital Realty on your location, sure, right? But if you don't want to deal with that, right, then they were a great option for you. So versus like waiting, 3 or 4 months to finally figure out if you're going to work with this colo provider and getting the machines in there, and they got to set up the rack and you got to pay them to do that, right? So with us, it's done, and you just get it, right? So that's the type of customer that would be drawn to us, is they have those specific needs of like they want the security, the resiliency, the performance of bare metal. They don't want to actually go manage a cage themselves. They don't want to like determine the networking access and set up and be responsible for all that. So we provide all of that for you via an API.
Yep, with speed.
Yeah.
One thing that I've been having fun following you do on socials, on Twitter and LinkedIn, we'll put your links in the show notes, is you'll occasionally post inventory for available GPUs.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what's the response been like? Does that drive sales?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. People will email us directly, and because that's the thing, is like it's like fundamentally we're building like a marketplace, but that's the thing with the marketplace people, right? It's like, do you go to Kayak to like, if you don't have an intention to buy something, the question is no.